Okay, what I'm here to talk about is about the practicalities. How do we take all this information and how do we then apply it in our business? And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. What I will mention is I am using slides, unlike my esteemed colleagues, which have a lot of words on. And I have to make some assumptions that you understand English and you can read them. I won't read them out, I will flick through them quickly. I have a very short space of time to get through a very big subject and to give you as much information. However, you can take that away, you'll get a copy of the slides and then you can review it and come back. Okay, so what are we doing? First, at Outset are providing an audit. And the audit effectively looks at the organisation, what's it got in place, etc. And what I will mention is that these areas, you need to look at all these areas. Every company, or most of the companies we're auditing, have segments that cover these areas. And this is what personal data, everyone collects personal data. Even if it's an email from a contact, ask an inquiry, once you start to do something, as Darren's already mentioned, you are processing personal data. So please be aware of that. You have to look at all these. What we're doing is we're doing a top-line audit where we go into an organisation, we have a discussion with ideally senior members of the organisation to look at what they're doing currently. And all these things are mentioned under the GDPR. So in some cases you could be putting these in place. But we conduct that audit, it gives a scoring result and it gives some idea of what's taking place, and then we can make recommendations. And that's really, as Darren's mentioned, the first step. If you don't do an audit, if you don't know where you are, it's quite difficult to start to implement or become compliant. We look at all these. The highlighted bits at the bottom, systems and security. As we've already mentioned, we are not IT specialists, despite the fact what Jonathan might think of me. I'm not an IT specialist, I'm not a technology guru, and therefore we're quite limited on those areas where most organisations now use automated systems and securities, encryption, etc. But we can certainly advise on those, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. Common requirements. In order to cut to the chase, what happens following an audit? These are the most common ones we come across. And therefore, logically speaking, if you tick a lot of these boxes, you're going in the right direction. And a lot of it is policy creation. There are a number of reviews you have to do of existing policies, anything to do with personal data, and you need to look at those. You need to implement a consent process. A lot of us have been doing consent in some ways through the contract, as Darren's mentioned, but you now need to look at recording and capturing how you are gaining consent externally from suppliers, marketing, etc. You need a data breach process. Most organisations do not have a data breach process, and you need to look at implementing that. And you need to update the subject access request. Because we're probably complying with the Data Protection Act already in existence, we probably have a subject access request written in there. However, you now need to review it and update it. Review encryption and security, not going to talk about technology, and introduce a compliance officer. Now the good thing is, all these we can help and support you with. Okay, that's part of what we do. So we understand these, we have the expertise, and we can help and support you with all these items, apart from the last one, which is the data compliance officer, data protection officer. But we've got steps in place to hopefully have that in position so we can offer you that service as well. So all these, if you need help with them, come to us. When you've done all that, does it mean compliance? And Darren's already mentioned this. You cannot be compliant without controlling your data. And we can't emphasise that enough. It is no good sitting in an ivory tower, ticking the boxes, issuing a policy, hoping everyone's going to comply with it, and then not have any idea about where your data is flowing in the organisation. So we can assist you and support you in that as well. We do a data flow, data monitoring, data mapping, data impact assessment, call it whatever you will, or whatever the GDPR, ICO call it, and we use the why, who, what, when, where to look at data coming into your organisation from any level. It can be the organisation, it can be the team, or it can be even down to an individual, your receptionist. How are they receiving data? What are they doing it? Where it's going? So we can look at it at those levels to identify what's going on. And these are the things we're actually looking for. Internal transference, external transference, what you're doing with the data, archiving and deletion, and especially retention. Okay, so this is one we've done recently. This is an HR team. Well, that'll interest people, won't it? And therefore, we were looking at an employee that was doing processing on behalf of the business, a small p, as Darren mentions. And what we were looking at, there was exchange of information, data subject. Now, the data subject could be a manager that is then passing information about an employee. So again, there's a continuation line here. But the data subject is and the employee processing. The employee doing the processing is sharing that, because it's HR, they share all that's going on with their own team. So the data is now flowing within the organisation, both ways. The team, the local HR team, want a bit more advice, could be occupational health, etc. So they seek advice from a wider team. So this data is now flowing backwards and forwards through the organisation. And then the wider team needs some external support, occupational health for example, and therefore you now have a whole web of issues going on. And identifying and controlling that data then becomes the big issue. But that's only one part of it. Then what we need to consider is where the data is held. And this is why I wear a mask, because it scares me. The data is being held at just one individual in nearly all these locations. Laptop, their phone, in Outlook, on the server, they print it, because most printers nowadays have a data memory, so it's stored there. In the cloud, because they want to back it up and reassure it, and on the social media platforms. So it's being stored in all those locations you've got to be aware of. And when we start to look at those locations, it adds to the nightmare we have on controlling data. This is just one employee. If this is an HR team with maybe 3 to 5 people, that is replicated across all those and then further out. That is the difficulty you have in not understanding where your data is. Because when someone asks for it, or they come and ask the question, you can't respond. That's the difficulty. So I've mentioned printer, I've mentioned cloud. HRIS systems, we have Breathe HR here. Okay, HRIS systems, you have data in the cloud. Okay, make sure you know what's there, why it's there, and the purposes for doing it. So we're looking at consent, storage and access, and transfer. And consent, as Darren mentioned, consent for external suppliers or privacy notices for internal. Okay, so I'm now going to look briefly, very quickly, at managing your risk, because this is what hopefully you're interested in. And we're going to use the GDPR principles as a basis. I'll start with the general issues. Identify all ways the organisation adds personal data into systems. We've mentioned it. Okay, how are you collecting this data? What is personal data? What are you doing? Identify additional processing in workflows. We do it the same as every other organisation do it. We add custom information, or we say when a prospect, for example, gets to a certain point, they change their status. So make sure we identify those workflows. Identify poor practice. None of us have poor practice, do we? Okay, so stealing information from social media and then doing something with it. So I'm processing personal data. I probably haven't got consent, even though it's in the public domain. Managing HR notes, express opinion, not fact. No doubt this will come back in the Q&As about the right to be forgotten. Wish I could. Okay, ensure collection and use of all personal data within purposes of your data protection policy. The most crucial document from my perspective is your data protection policy. It should identify the ways you collect and manage and retain personal data. That, for me, is the first thing we're looking at when we do any sort of audit. Ensure the policy stated purposes cover all the activities, not listed necessarily, but covering most of them in a general point. And I'll get there and pick me up on that or emphasise it. Identify third parties processing data on your behalf. People that are doing it on your behalf, your payroll business, etc. They should be aware of what your policy is and complying with it. Yep. Likewise, if you're processing data on behalf of somebody else, you should be complying with their policy or writing it into how you're doing the agreement. Okay, principle 1, lawfulness, fairness and transparency. You need to make all staff aware, and this is why awareness is part of the audit. Okay, what are you doing to make sure staff are aware of their responsibilities within your business for processing data? Comply with the subject's right to be informed and kept up to date. At the point of initial collection, as soon as they contact you, you should be kicking a ball rolling to say, now, am I going to consent? Am I giving them a privacy notice? What am I doing to comply with the GDPR? And update your privacy notices. Darren's mentioned it. Clear and transparent. No longer hidden in the bottom of your terms and conditions somewhere. It has to be easily accessible to employers, employees and suppliers. Collected for specified, explicit and legitimate purposes. Workflows for services obtain consent before adding to a system. The ideal is as soon as they contact you, start to think, how have I got this consent? How have I allowed this person? What am I doing with this person's data? So manage that. No information retained for how long? Goes within the data protection policy. Children, question mark, love them. Okay? Let's avoid that. Does anyone do services for children here? Yes? Okay, speak to Darren afterwards, please. Okay. Remember, when children reach the age of 18, you need to start them obtaining their own consent. Don't just leave them on the books and forget about them, which is crucial to the whole data thing. Adequate, relevant and limited to what is necessary. I don't see any 5 minutes going up. Ideally provide choice about extent of processing, allow subjects to manage their own privacy settings. The ideal are things where they can manage their own settings. If you've got something, and if they don't like what's going on, they can go and tick a box. Opt out, opt in, call it whatever you will, but they can tick a box to say, I no longer wish to receive, or I want to receive. Those are the things. If they can manage their own settings, that's the ideal work. Some of you are technical gurus, and will have that. Be aware of your custom fields. Mention it on custom workflows. If you're collecting data and then doing custom fields or something like that to then monitor or report on that data, make sure you consider that as part of your data flows. Accurate and kept up to date. Enables subjects to maintain their own data, as I've mentioned. Periodically provide summary to individuals to make sure consent and you've updated the records to comply with it, and workflows ensure data is kept up to date. You need to be monitoring with systems or manual or whatever method. When was it last updated? Yep, the days are gone when we take something, put it in a HR file, file it away, and then drag it out 20 years later when they leave the organisation. Kept for no longer is necessary. Your data retention policy. Can I ask, has anyone got a data retention policy here, please? Apart from Ready Chris, of course.
Partly.
Okay, so 4 or 5 have a data retention policy. You will need a data retention policy. You need to spell it out as to what you're doing to archive and delete data, and you should be able to monitor that that is in place. Okay, you don't just stick it on a USB drive and forget it. Include archiving inactive contacts. We do it. Prospects come in, they contact us, we stick them in a database, and we forget about them. They need to be archived. They become inactive at a point. What are we doing with the data? And there's all sorts of discussions we can have about archiving. Don't forget all your backups. Common, we back up to the cloud, we back up to tape drives, USB drives, etc. And then we delete the data, forgetting all our backups. Yep. And remember that most systems and software have the ability to restore old data. Appropriate security of personal data. Ensure your internal procedures are sufficient, adequate, regularly tested and working, and minimise your security risk. I've mentioned I'm not going to get into technology, and we're teaching you to suck eggs. If I don't say that these are the obvious ones you should be considering to minimise your security risk. And the most important one, periodically change passwords, and do not permit savings of passwords in browsers, where A, it allows people to access data that might be confidential, or B, gives others going onto your machines or whatever the ability to see usernames and things like that. So be aware of that. But these are straightforward. Accountability, Darren mentioned it. Your procedures that demonstrate accountable practices. You need to show, in order to protect your business from this 20 million euro fine, or whatever Darren keeps slapping around the fish, okay? When you do this, make sure you can monitor. You're monitoring, you're taking responsibility, you're making your staff aware about what to do with personal data, you're gathering consent, you're recording what's going on. These are the steps you need to be taking. And the way to do it is, imagine you're a new contact or employee to the organisation. Would you be clear at every point? So when I contact them, can I see the data protection policy? Can I see the privacy notice? And when they start to do things with my data, are they informing me of what they're doing, and when necessary, getting consent from me to do things? That's what we need to do.